Well, we had decided that we were definitely safe to take the tire chains off and be done with the tire chain season in the snow and ice, and officially ready to transition into mud season. Mud season begins with a very small mudslide out here onto the main road coming off of my property. Luckily, the weather cooled down for a couple of days, but it did bring more snow. That just meant a muddy mess for trying to get around doing farm work. We were able to get all of that stuff done and then get back to the final stages of finishing mud and the last few pieces of drywall. You can see how these seep out of the ground up here. Causes some of this to slough off just because that clay layer turns into this. It only happens in a few spots, and it's where there's kind of a natural depression in the clay layer. When that whole thing slides off, fills in the ditch that's right here, kind of pools up and subsurface soaks through, and we call them seeps or weeps. A couple spots like this will weep late into the middle of summer as the groundwater is draining from way up higher on the mountain. So all we do is try to maintain flow and keep them flowing where they'll need to go, rather than having this kind of situation, because then it just tracks out, spreads out, and when it fans out, everything gets saturated. But otherwise it stays in the ditch and runs down and can stay dry like that. It's not bad because we put a lot of gravel into this and compacted it a lot over the years, so it's not too bad, but just got to fix those now and then. Well, the tire chains had finally dried out overnight, so it was just fine to get them taken off of the bucket and put into the shop for now. As I got down to this first little mudslide seep location, it hadn't come off of the hill very badly yet, so all I needed to do is try to open up the ditch flow just a little bit more. So the simplest way for me to do that was to put the two tires right into the ditch and just kind of drive back and forth a little bit. All that does is kind of stir up the slurry a little bit and help it move down the ditch and open up so that it flows well. Now on to the bigger mudslide. This one's actually coming out into the road just a little bit, only a couple of feet, 2 to 3 at the most. But more importantly, it's blocking the major ditch line that runs along the side of the road there across my frontage of my property. I dug that ditch several years ago to help with this flow that comes off of the hill here. The runoff would simply come down this road all through this corner and just turn it into bottomless mud ruts. The ditch has been hugely successful in the past several years, and every year right through here in this section of my frontage, I get a couple of small little bits of earth that just slough off of the hillside here a little bit. This is by far the worst that it's been in several years. If you watch carefully, right there between the dark and the tan layer of soil, you can see the water emitting out of the ground and trickling pretty quickly into the soup. The knee-jerk reaction is to think, oh man, that's quite a spring. We should probably develop it and capture the water and use that on our property. However, it really isn't a spring. It's not an artesian spring, it's not a well spring, it's not a seasonal spring. All it is runoff flow. That light tan layer of soil is actually a very dense layer of clay. The soil above it that's all dark is the clay-based topsoil layer that's the thickest in the forested areas. During this runoff season, that topsoil layer gets saturated pretty quickly. Because the ground is so steep, the water simply flows above the clay layer through that saturated layer until it hits a spot that's been exposed and it is allowed to seep out. All across this mountain, there are several of these veins that just run from the tip all the way down to the creek. And any place that you cross that vein and expose it down, even partially down to the clay layer, it's going to seep this time of year. The higher up the mountain you go in that vein, the sooner in the season it dries out. As that water in the saturated soil continues to drain out and work its way down to the creek, subsurface. But again, it's a shallow layer, usually no more than about 3 feet deep. And as a matter of fact, the first spot that I stopped to clean up, that little seep, happens to be the exact same vein that this one is coming out of. That vein happens to be exposed at one other location between these 2 points, right near my garden. Because I'm aware of its location and how it travels down the mountain, it's really not that big of a deal to maintain. In fact, as long as this ditch stays open up here, it actually diverts a lot of the water out of that vein, and the effects down below are drastically reduced. We go from digging mud soup yesterday and last night to 4 to 5 fresh inches of snow this morning so far.
Go mudding in your tractor?
Yeah. We had gone into town to run a couple of errands this morning, and on our way home, we pulled into the house and realized something didn't quite look right. And we saw a handful of our goats down on our front porch. So as we came up to investigate, they naturally came back up here to this sorting pen that was open. And I quickly realized that they just simply weren't satisfied with the quality of hay that we had left in the feeder. So we needed to get up here with the tractor and empty out all the rotten, nasty hay out of the feeder and make room for some clean and better hay. One of the last couple of hay bales that we had from storing over winter.
That smells fresh. Stinky.
One problem we have with this feeder over winter is that the goats will jump up into the top of it and stand on the hay bales while they eat.
Ooh. Yeah, that stinks so bad. Jeez.
They've been up on it like they have. It's just makes it worse because then they poop on it and pee on it.
Are you gonna put a new bale up in here?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to put a bottom to it, babe.
No.
Yeah, leave it out, and that way we can. So now you can probably see why I'm thinking this would be a nice garden bed.
We've never really had any issues with the goats jumping up into that feeder in the years past. But these 2 white nannies that we have in here are something else. They're the loudest screamers, the pickiest eaters, and every time I get a bale in there, they don't hesitate to jump up on top of it and start eating, pissing and pooping all over it immediately. We'll definitely make some modifications to this feeder this summer, and most likely modify their existence in this herd.
Those front edge gates that we put in, could they close? The divider gates.
Yeah, I don't know if we can or not. We can try. I thought about it earlier too.
I think one looks like it could close, but I just don't.
Yeah, the one on the fence looks good. It's the ones on the building. I think they're free, but I think there's ice in front of them. So we can take a look.
Yeah, so the more I'm looking at this space, I really can see a really good good thing to put a garden out here, just like a browsing garden for the animals. Lots of cover crop and billion squashes, things that, I don't know, we can't eat all, you know?
Yeah. We really have the right combination of circumstances to make gardening inside this corral this summer a really, really good idea. We have a massive amount of good compostable organic matter up here, a heavy-duty 6-foot wide rototiller for the back of the tractor to turn it into the soil, good fencing to protect the crops, plenty of water close by, and thousands of seeds harvested from our garden for last year. So really, it's a low-effort, high-yield decision. We're simply going to fill the area with a good cover crop and high-yielding produce to develop and protect the soil and, of course, produce a large amount of supplemental feed for all of the animals.
Today, my goal is to get the last coat of mud on. So I am working with I think it's a 14-inch knife. So I'm gonna make sure that it's nice and wide. I'm putting quite a bit of mud on the seams to make sure that I close the gap. So starting with the ceiling, I've decided to put 2 scaffolds together so I have a little bit more room to move. And I'm just gonna kind of shuffle down my way to finish the ceiling today. So I'm gonna get started.
Ola's skills at drywall mudding are really quite good. She has a good technique and has enough patience to stick with it. I have a pretty good technique myself, but I tend to lack a little bit of patience. I get started and tend to want to hurry and get more done, rather than taking the time to be really particular and meticulous about what I'm doing. That generally leads to me doing a little bit more sanding on my work than she would ever have to do on hers. Because time is a very valuable commodity for us, I'm trying pretty hard to stay away from the mud and focus my efforts on anything else that needs doing in the construction process. Not to mention that it gives me the opportunity to showcase Ola's talents and celebrate her skills and ability.
I'm going to wrap up putting this drywall up on this side. I've got 2 sheets over on that end that I need to put up, and then this will finish this out. Just like on the other side of this doorway, I'm going to flush this one with the doorway. Because it's such a small space with where it is and the way that the trim is going to fit right against the ceiling and everything, I'll put a strip there, and I'll just put a filler strip across the top. Sometimes if you have a taller wall and you have, say, 8 or 10 inches, which is more common on a typical wall height from a doorway, that 8 or 10 inch piece that comes over the top can have a tendency of cracking there if you have a joint at that corner. So that's why you would carry the sheet around, because one solid sheet is not going to crack there. But the joint can reappear because it's a weak point. Every bit of this drywall here is going to be behind trim. So it's really just there to shim it out and get everything even and flat. And we'll mud and tape it. And if it does crack, it'll still be behind the trim anyway. So it's really not going to be a big deal. So I'm going to just go ahead and put this part on. I've got to cut out 2 outlet boxes here. So I'm going to set it into place, and I'll fasten the bottom and fasten the top with just a couple screws so that it's held parallel and against on this tape joint. So everything's tight. That'll hold it in place. I can make the cuts, and that will keep from having too much pressure pushing onto those boxes and cause the breakout before I get it fully cut. And then I can push it in and screw those in, and then it'll be nice and tight. Oftentimes when I'm cutting a skinny strip like this, or like this one, rather than trying to lay it out on the bench and cut such a skinny little strip, I find it easier to go ahead and take a piece that's the right length, screw it into place, and then use this, the framing opening, as a straight edge. Run my knife right along here, bend it this way carefully, and then I can just trim the paper and have it cut through.
I'm not sure if the camera can catch this. This is 2 coats of mud. And you can still see the tape. And there is just a little divot right here. So it looks like there's just like a little step. So I gotta float this one more time because the paint and the primer will pick this up and we will see it forever. Also, when the sun hits it just right, you can see all the imperfections. So I'm hoping that there's less of them tomorrow. That's what I'm noticing on the ceiling, and there's a lot of joints that are like that. They're not quite floated really well. They just need one more coat. I started using the 14-inch knife, and I found my weak little hands, they just couldn't handle it. I'm like, I feel like I'm carrying really heavy and I couldn't float it very well, so I'm back to a 12-inch knife. I feel more comfortable with that. I'm gonna widen the seam this way. So I'm gonna pull my knife over here, I'm gonna pull my knife over here, and then I'll pull my knife to the middle. And that's how I'm treating all the joints. I'm just widening it and widening it. And then I feather the edges, so when I sand, it's just a lot more quicker. And then when I take my knife, I can see if it rocks. See how it rocks? There's a big gap right here.
It's making a hump in about a 10 or 12-inch space, and you're gonna stretch that out to like a 25 to 30-inch space. So that's why you put a knife to either side, one on both sides, so that you can take that same little hump and blend it, make it much longer, so that it's not so obvious.
Blended, and it won't be noticeable at all. That's why I'm doing that. And when I sand it tomorrow, my hope is when I take that knife, it fits and I don't have to go back in and do any mud. Mark is getting ready to put trim and things around the window, and I want to finish the ceiling and all the joints. And then
everything you did yesterday looks like it's probably done, just feather out.
Yep.
And that's like most of that back pocket in the ceiling. So.
Yep, and then I'm gonna work above the stairs. This is where it becomes a little sketchy for me because I have to be on a very skinny scaffold and I just become, you know, afraid of heights. But I'm gonna get everything, we're just gonna have to do it. Yesterday I decided, I typically don't like to mud the corners at the same time. I like to do one side and then the other side. And yesterday I said, I'm just gonna do it. I have to just do it because there's no point in waiting another day. And I've decided that my skill was probably good enough for now to get it done. We really are coming to a finish line, so we're both really anxious and excited at the same time.
Boy, when Ola gets focused on a task, she's unstoppable. With a little bit of help moving her around on the scaffold so she didn't have to go up and down, she worked like a machine on this. At this pace, we're going to be priming and painting in no time.